With the nation's attention turned to the city of Charlottesville, many are wondering what the protests mean for our freedom of speech. One America's Pearson Sharp has more on how radical left-wing groups are using racism to silence anyone who opposes them.
The events at Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend have sparked a national debate, with one question taking center stage. How is the violence allowed to happen? Well, both the white nationalists and Antifa protesters are being blamed for the attacks that left 3 people dead and 23 others injured. Many are also blaming police. According to numerous witnesses and first-hand accounts, the police who were present just stood by as the violence unfolded. Critics say law enforcement kept to the sidelines until the rally was declared an unlawful assembly and the governor announced a state of emergency. Many experts, including former officer Benjamin Manns of the D.C. Metropolitan Police, say the police were definitely behaving oddly.
The police presence didn't seem unusual. Their lack of response seemed very unusual to me when the rhetoric and the violence, and it just did the movement of the crowd seem unchecked and uncontrolled.
Witnesses claim that violent anti-fascist protesters were not pinned in their own area, which was part of the agreement with the Charlottesville Police Department. They say the Antifa members were walking the streets freely and even blocked the entrance to Lee Park, hurling rocks, sticks, and pepper spray onto the demonstrators there to support the statue of General Lee.
The first and foremost thing you do when you have a small group that's going to get widely counter-protested by a bigger group is you keep the 2 groups separate. If you look at Charlottesville, they did not do that.
Joe Heim of the Washington Post, who was at the event, said there was a lot of fighting, with counter-protesters swinging sticks, punching people, and spraying chemicals.
So it obviously begs the question how an assault with a dangerous weapon or a felony assault could occur in the presence of a police officer and no one was arrested.
Police were stationed around the sides and rear of the park, but Market Street wasn't being patrolled. It quickly filled with Antifa protesters who turned hostile toward supporters of Lee's statue. Witnesses reported counter-protesters ripping a newspaper stand off the sidewalk and hurling it at the statue's supporters. Others saw Antifa members chase down a white nationalist, beating him with their signs, while an elderly man was thrown to the ground and attacked with a stick. Still, the police did nothing. Then the unthinkable happened. A protester raced his Dodge Challenger down 4th Street, where demonstrators were gathered just a few blocks away from Lee Park, crashing into the crowd and killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer.
And lastly, the big problem that I found extremely odd was when a crowd moves on you and you have a protest march and they're either moving outside the perimeters of their permit or they're just moving and you want to control it and they enter public streets, you have to close the street and try to corral them into a direction. If you look at the video from the murderer who drove his car into the crowd, you'll see that his access to the street was unhindered. He didn't plow through a barricade of police officers, and he went and backed up. There didn't seem to be any police presence whatsoever on the street when this individual decided to use his vehicle as a weapon.
So with over 1,000 police, first responders, and even National Guardsmen in the area, how did things get so out of hand? To answer that, let's back up some 6.5 months to the start of the year. In January of 2017, the mayor of Charlottesville, Mike Signer, announced his city was the capital of resistance in a rally following President Donald Trump's election. The rally was organized by Signer, who declared his plans to resist Trump's new administration. He took that resistance seriously and even wrote an article for Time magazine titled, "The Electoral College was created to stop demagogues like Trump." And Signer wasn't alone in his efforts to undermine the president. Signer's vice mayor, Wes Bellamy, is a staunch opponent of Trump, refusing even to call him president and instead referring to him only as 45, saying that he doesn't deserve the title of his office. But Bellamy has a checkered past, one which was also brought to light by the Unite the Right rally organizer, Jason Kessler. Since the attacks on August 12th, Bellamy has been portrayed by the mainstream media as a civil rights hero. But a series of sexist, homophobic, racist posts were discovered on his Twitter feed exposing his own prejudice and bigotry. He's been accused of being a black supremacist and made numerous offensive remarks about rape, as well as anti-white comments, including flat out stating that he just doesn't like white people. Bellamy has also long been pushing to have the statue of Robert E. Lee removed and has vowed that if he succeeds, he'll then champion the removal of statues of Thomas Jefferson, an icon in Charlottesville's history. Could his blatant hatred towards white people play a part in his efforts to tear down the city's historic monuments? At this point, it starts to look like there's more behind the mainstream media narrative than just a gang of racist whites pouring into the city with the goal of instigating violence. So, what's the real story? Well, many who were there that day, including the ACLU, say Charlottesville police were ordered to stand down. Police reportedly said they would not intervene unless given the command to do so. But where would that order have come from? Well, according to Benjamin Manns, the buck stops at the top, Governor Terry McAuliffe. McAuliffe is also a Democrat and an open opponent of President Trump. In an interview following the rally, he went as far as to suggest Trump shared some of the blame for the incident, claiming his rhetoric is stirring up feelings of hate.
We need to work together. I told the president that twice. I'd be willing to work with you if we can work together to bring people together. But stop the hate speech, stop the rhetoric in this country. We have got to bring people together.
McAuliffe supported efforts to shut down the rally, endorsing its relocation to another nearby city park. But while the city of Charlottesville tried to revoke the Unite the Right rally permit, a judge ruled the city's efforts were based only on the content of organizer Jason Kessler's speech. The judge also observed the city didn't enforce the same standards on the counter-protesters and allowed them to remain at Lee Park. And while the governor is quick to condemn the white nationalists for the violence, he has so far refused to speak out against Antifa. The anti-fascist activists were at the center of the worst violence over the weekend, including attacks on several journalists.
The journalists were widely assaulted while covering the crowd right in front of Virginia State Police and Charlottesville police officers.
Counter-protesters attacked 2 journalists from InfoWars with pepper spray, and when it was reported to police, they just laughed. Another journalist, Taylor Lawrence from The Hill, was punched by suspected Antifa protesters as she tried to film them during the rally. And on Sunday, a journalist with WTVR was viciously attacked by a group of leftist marchers who ordered him to stop filming their protest against the Unite the Right rally. The journalist received staples for a head wound after he was knocked to the ground and then kicked and beaten. Yet while the governor's office has repeatedly denounced the statue supporters as white supremacists and Nazis, McAuliffe has remained silent on the violence committed by the Antifa protesters, refusing multiple questions from reporters about Antifa and the other radical left-wing protesters at the rally.
The entire event raises questions not only about equality, but about the foundation of our society, the freedom of speech. From the very beginning, when Judge Glenn Conrad ruled the city unfairly targeted the Unite the Right rally members for their beliefs, freedom of speech was not equally represented. But that falls in line with the left's apparent efforts at silencing opposition with claims of racism or hate. On Monday, MSNBC hosted Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors, who argued that rallygoers didn't even have a right to share their message. Cullors interpreted the Bill of Rights herself, coming to the conclusion that hate speech isn't protected by the First Amendment. In the same breath that she said the white nationalists didn't have the right to protest, she also claimed they were the ones actually taking away people's rights.
I think what's important in this moment is white nationalists are actually fighting to take away people's rights. Black Lives Matter and groups like Black Lives Matter are fighting for equality. And hate speech, which is what we're seeing coming out of white nationalist groups, is not protected under the First Amendment rights.
Following the rally, the mainstream media leapt into action, rushing to tell viewers how to interpret the events. As President Trump denounced any and all violence committed by many sides, he was attacked for condemning all violence, and not just the attacks committed by white nationalists. But the media glossed over his response, even before all the facts were available.
I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have, you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit and they were very, very violent.
The president went on to condemn not only racism, but the KKK and neo-Nazis as well, saying that those who spread violence in the name of bigotry strike at the very core of America. Yet President Trump was also quick to point out that the majority of the people who were protesting were not racist, but were simply there to preserve a part of history.
I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee.
These people never had the chance to speak or share their side of the story. Immediately painted as racists and left without protection from police, they were forced to leave their rally that was nearly canceled before it could even begin, after it was declared unlawful. Many witnesses say the statue supporters were intentionally funneled into the waiting Antifa crowds, giving the media and the left a chance to throw out headlines denouncing them as violent racists. And that's exactly the message that people at the rally expressed, that they were shut down before they even had a chance to speak.
The police that were given a stand-down order as we were trying to exercise our legal constitutional right to have a permit. This is on the hands of the city government, of the police, and the radical left.
Well, I don't know what was accomplished or not accomplished because it looked to me like everything was shut down before it even got started. I'm just here trying to preserve my First Amendment rights to free speech, and they're being eroded in this town left and right.
Antifa, the so-called anti-fascists who stormed the organized rally in support of Robert E. Lee's statue, have a clear agenda to intimidate and eliminate anyone who opposes them and stop them from speaking out. Their efforts against free speech have been demonstrated numerous times at events in Berkeley as well as at the inauguration of President Trump, and now once again in Charlottesville, Virginia. The events at Lee Park beg the question, are you allowed to attack someone just because they don't agree with you? Well, with the media's free pass for Antifa members, the answer appears to be yes, as long as they're from the right. People like Mayor Signer, Governor Terry McAuliffe, the City Council, and even Vice Mayor Wes Bellamy, all the people in power, appear to be fighting against our constitutional rights. Because whatever you support, white nationalism, Black Lives Matter, or anything and everything in between, when the freedom of speech is taken away from one group, it's taken away from all of us. Pearson Sharp, One America News.